Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dion's Daily Dose. So today we have a very special guest. I'm sure you guys saw it. If you haven't, Spencer Lemmons, you can read all about him in the little intro, but we'll learn more. He's a good dude. He was my opponent in the primary in 2020. So I kind of had to take a little step back and act like he wasn't as cool as he is, but he is. Make sure you give him some love. I'm going to bring him on here. And this is a learning experience for us because we get to actually talk to somebody in the know about the stuff that I've been talking about. So here we go. There he is. Welcome, Spencer.
Hey, Dion. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Good to see you. So everybody's had a chance. They know that you're to read, I hope. They know you're an active police officer, which we thank you very much for your service, and thank you for your service to this country as a Marine. I know I just want to say I appreciate you coming on today. I know it's a hard day for Marines with what's going on overseas. We're not gonna spend much time on that. You and I agree on that. We're just gonna focus on what's the reason for you coming on. Put it that way.
Sure.
So let me bring up my thing here. First of all, I want to say, again, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. I started doing a little research. I shared a video that I don't know if you got a chance to watch, but it was a police officer interacting with someone who was very obviously on the autism spectrum. And it seems to be pretty prevalent throughout the community that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of specific training when it comes to dealing with this. So I started kind of digging into it and calling some agencies. I've written some emails, and I looked into the, let's see, make sure I got it right. The Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. Here, I'm going to share the screen here real quick so you can see what I'm looking at.
Great.
Let's see here. And it just gives a really rudimentary, there we go, the mandated in-service training. And it says that it covers mental illness, addiction and disabilities, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, and endangered. And that's adults and high-risk missing persons, including those under 21 years of age. There's 8 areas of human trafficking. And then, of course, the annual in-service training requirements. And that it just says reserve officers will have the same as regular police officers. So there is a degree of training out there. I was under the impression that there wasn't anything, but I actually went and spoke to Michigan City Police Department, and they're like, yeah, we do it in our in-service. But there doesn't seem to be any prescribed amount, like X number of hours or anything like that. Now, I still have to email them and get a direct quote from them. But based on their website, it says, yes, there's mandated in-service training on these areas, but it doesn't say how much. Like, it tells us there's 24 hours annually of in-service training that has to include 2 hours in firearms, 2 hours in physical tactics, use of force, and 2 hours in police vehicle operation. But it doesn't say how long for the other stuff. So I've been talking quite a while. I'll let you respond here.
Yeah. So when it comes to a lot of this in-service training, it goes by each department as far as how much time they invest on one particular topic. Now, in my experience, and I'm sure there are a lot of officers would agree, a lot of this stuff is kind of more of death by PowerPoint. By that I mean is that when it comes to this training, they basically said, here's what, here are some signs for autism. Here's some things that could cause them to put them off, to make them angry. Here's some things that we've seen that make it easier for them to kind of cooperate and get along, so you can talk to them and engage with them. But depending on the class and what the department particularly wants to focus on, that could be a 2 or 3 minute portion of the in total 24-hour in-service training. Now, personally, with my experience with 8 years of law enforcement, I've dealt with people on the autism spectrum, but as far as anybody, I would say I've dealt with more high-functioning autistic people.
Right.
The people people that are diagnosed with autism, but they can carry on conversations. They live on their own. They're very well aware of what's going on. Unfortunately, though, this is something that kind of ties back to you and I have talked to you about is the defund the police. So just for people who are watching, if you think the police officers don't get enough training, and as you're pointing out there, like these are some things we're covering, if you want to cut budgets and cut times for when officers can actually get them this minimal amount of training, then you're really setting the police officers up for failure. And it's a little frustrating because I know you and I talked about it before. I would like to have more training in this particular topic. A lot of the stuff is the Indianapolis basically says, here's the stuff we want you to cover, just to kind of cover their own rear end. And then they kind of put it on in the departments. Now, based on your department, if you're a department that say that has 12 guys, can you spend half a day taking 4 guys off the road and talking strictly about autism awareness? It's not practical. It's just unfortunately, unless you're working for a really big department like Indianapolis Metro or Fort Wayne, where they have well over 200 people, it's really hard to get the amount of time dedicated to that kind of training.
And I think that that's really important for people to understand is this right here is just a tiny portion of everything that you guys have to kind of pack in a certain amount of time. And these officers have to be pulled off the streets in order to go through the in-service training. It was the same, I referred before to my time as a correctional officer, but there are a few parallels. We had in-service training once a year where we had to go in for 40 hours into the classroom and learn the stuff. And like you said, it's death by PowerPoint. It's, look at all this stuff, take a few notes. Okay, you're good. You meet the minimum requirements for the state to, continue being an officer or whatever.
Absolutely.
I think we can all agree that firearms training, physical tactics and use of force, and police vehicle operation are critically important to a police officer's safety on the streets. We can't take time away from those. We have to make sure that you guys are trained in that. But at the same time, we kind of need to start looking at our departments and say, okay, we need to ensure that our officers are trained in other areas. Like you said, you've personally dealt with those on the spectrum. That's something that I believe a lot of officers can expect to at least encounter. And especially the mentally ill, those with addictions, that should definitely be a priority when it comes to training. But there's limited funding. So anyone saying, hey, take more money away from the police departments and, put them to other programs doesn't truly understand what our officers are up against. So kind of getting into, we see what's the mandated in-service training, how many hours each department spends on it is up to the department, but it's on the list. You got to do this. What kind of training was there at the academy that kind of specifically focused on that?
So in the academy, we go over all the stuff, autism, mental illness, all that kind of stuff like that, dealing with drug addicts in particular as well. A lot of that too, again, was death by PowerPoint. Now I would say we'd spent longer than what we do now at our department. I think if I recall correctly, with autism in itself, and that might've been like an hour and a half block by itself, where we actually had instructors come in and say like, hey, this is like people who actually deal with people on the spectrum, counselors, mental health officials that actually deal with these people like on a daily basis. We actually had people come in and actually speak with us and tell us, hey, this is the kind of stuff you would think you would encounter. And actually, I remember particular part of the classes where the instructors, these again are people that deal with people on the spectrum and deal with people with mental illness. They actually had us do scenarios with them. So what they would do is they would act like they were severely autistic, or they would act like they had severe mental issues or paranoid schizophrenic. That was probably the best training that I've had since then, as far as dealing with that, besides obviously having firsthand experience on the road and dealing with people with mental illness and with somebody who was on the autism spectrum. So that was something that sticks out to me as far as the academy goes. So I was fortunate to be to have that kind of training during that time.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to throw some standard questions at you here. What are some things that you learned at the academy that that the average civilian might be surprised that they teach?
A lot of it has to do with criminal law. A lot of things that are like you're from traffic infractions to actual criminal law itself. Just to give a quick example. So for traffic law, a lot of people don't know this, but bicyclists, so people who are cycling or like that, they have to obey all the same traffic laws as vehicles do. So they have to stop at stop signs. They have to use turn signals. As a matter of fact, it's actually an infraction in Indiana. You actually are required to have a lighting device, and an alarm sounding your voice, whether it be a bell or horn on your bicycle.
Oh,
So there, it's like little stuff like that I didn't know that until I went to the academy and then started my career actually working on the road. That wow, there's actually a lot of things that are infractions that happen all the time that that's never enforced.
right.
So a lot of that deal with traffic, criminal law. I would say probably would be a lot of different things, like as far as what people can go to jail for. What are the minimum requirements for arrest, like child arrest offenses, for example, like domestic battery, in the presence of children, or when there's any complaint of pain, it's a shall arrest offense, which basically means that somebody has to go to jail. There's no, well, we'll give you a report and you can file it later. Like somebody has to go to jail. Like it's
Right.
with DUI, you have to go to jail. Once you've established probable cause, they have to go to jail. It's a shall arrest offense. So that's something that a lot of people don't know about. There's obviously more things that we can go really in depth to as far as until you learn the job you don't know about. So
yeah. And I think that that's important that people understand that there are offenses that are shall arrest, which means you have to arrest, and may arrest, right? Which means officer discretion. You can choose whether or not to arrest people, but different departments have different policies. But obviously, like you said, domestic battery, DUI, these are things that you have to arrest. Once you've proven probable cause, there's no option. There's no talking your way out of it. You have to go to jail.
absolutely.
And a lot of times people, their anger over situations like that, for example, which I personally, if somebody's driving drunk, get them off the street. If someone's, domestic battery, take them to jail. But there are some that are arguable that it's like, okay, but those are things that need to be taken up with the people who make the laws.
Yes.
Right.
That's something that doesn't get talked about enough. A lot of people, not to cut you off, Dion, but
No,
a lot of
by
people
all
like to berate the police officers, because they're arresting this guy for a BS reason, whatever. People have to understand that we're enforcing the laws that the lawmakers put on the books. Like the police officers don't write laws. Contrary to popular belief, we aren't down in Indianapolis on the House floor and saying, this is a law that that we wrote and that we created. We want you guys to punch through. That just doesn't happen. These are people that are your elected representatives from here down to Terre Haute to Fort Wayne down to Muncie that people vote and elect for. So that's something that's always frustrating for me personally as a police officer. I know a lot of the women and men I work with have the same anger, is that people are like, oh, this is a BS reason I'm getting arrested for. It's like, look, man, I didn't write the law. I don't know what to tell you, So yeah, that's something that unfortunately never really gets talked about, and I wish it would.
Yeah,
and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that nobody seems to understand or at least talk about. So I really do appreciate you bringing that up.
Right, which is why it's so critically important for people to vote for people that represent their interests, as far as wanting more laws or wanting less restrictive laws, whatever. It's very important that people vote for the people that represent their interests, so that they can make the laws or get rid of the laws that they want, gone. Because it's not the police officers who decide, the law.
And then the thing is too, I've noticed a lot of these people that complain about some of the laws that are in place are the same people that don't know who was on their town council.
Oh yeah.
So they like to complain about some laws in place. Like, all right, well then, you need to talk to, your councilman. Well, who's my councilman? How do you not know who your councilman is? So you're telling me that these laws are BS, but you can't even tell me who your local representative is? That's kind of the issue, right? So that's something that always is frustrated me my entire law enforcement career, is that people are angry about something, but then when they are asked to do something about it, they don't know who to go to or what to do. So it's a little silly and a little annoying, to be honest.
That's a great point, though, because most people think, I won't say the majority, but far too many people, the only the only foray into politics they have is, they see who's president and they either like or hate them. They might know their congressman and they might know their mayor, but that's it. The mayor doesn't make laws. The president doesn't make laws. Congress only affects federal laws. People need to learn their local officials, because those are the people that make the most impact on the laws in their area.
100%. And then it doesn't get talked about is people that, like, the most important elections that people have, for our listeners watching and listening, is that your local elections, your school board, your city council, those elections matter more than the presidential elections do. And people don't seem to understand that. Whether, depending on who you vote for, your taxes may be raised or lowered. Depending on who you elect in the school board, they may tell you that you can read To Kill a Mockingbird, or they may say, you know what, you can't. They may say your kids may have to wear a mask. Your kids may not have to. Those elections matter the most. And the fact that people don't seem to understand that, or even just take the time, it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. So moving on to some other questions. What are some unexpected duties you found yourself doing, like delivering a baby, rescuing a cat from a tree, something that, wow, I didn't even know police officers did this?
One that stands out, last summer around this time, we had a boat capsize in Lake Michigan. So we actually got a call that, from someone on the boat, hey, our boat's capsizing, it's starting to tip over. There's about 8 people on a boat and they couldn't swim. So I found myself with another officer literally stripping down to our skinnies here, our shorts and t-shirts, and jumping in the water and having to actually pull people out. I never thought in my career I'd be jumping in Lake Michigan trying to get people out of the water because their boat capsized. You always think like, well, the Coast Guard or something like that will take care of. But the Coast Guard, particularly here in Northwest Indiana, they cover the whole edge of Lake Michigan. So they have a lot of ground to cover. So that one sticks out. One thing in particular I've done is actually help land a helicopter after a really terrible car accident. When we have the fire department come on scene, they make the quick determination, hey, this person needs to be flown to University of Chicago or Christ Hospital in Chicago as well. I've actually had to literally get my squad car, get spotlights set up, and help guide a helicopter to land in an empty parking lot so we can actually get somebody transported on there.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool stuff. Obviously, you hope in your entire career never have to do that because of the circumstances. But with that being said, starting my career, I never even heard of that stuff happening. You see that on TV shows and movies, but to actually do it yourself, it's pretty wild.
Right. What are some of the positives of being a police officer that a lot of people don't hear about?
Well, obviously, besides the fact that you hear the stereotypical answers that you're helping a community, you're stopping crime, but one thing for me in particular is helping children. Unfortunately, we see situations of domestic violence, and kids are in the mix of it, and they either see it or unfortunately they're victims themselves. So one thing that people don't, it's a terrible situation to be in, but I always feel better knowing that I help get kids out of a terrible home, whether they're being neglected by their parents or they're victims of domestic violence. Another great thing that I like about the job personally is the fact of the camaraderie of the job, that you're always working towards a goal to make the city that you work in safer, so people can freely come and go and not have to worry about crime or anything like that. And then just finally go back to what I kind of said at the beginning, was basically taking bad people off the street, people that commit violent felonies towards people. These are robberies, these are murders, these are crimes like that are battery, people that are a menace to society, getting them off the street and putting them where they belong, and that's in jail. Because we can't have a successful and thriving society if people like that are out in jail and continue to harm people. We see what that's like over in Cook County in Chicago.
Yeah.
We have people that commit armed robbery and they don't even have a bond. So luckily enough, even Lake County has its issues. We still are able to at least put bad guys away for a period of time. So
that's good. What's your least favorite thing about being a police officer?
Probably are a few things. The misinformation, in particular, that cops are all bastards and that's all we do is shoot people. I've been lucky enough in my 8-year career, I've never had to shoot anybody. I've had to draw my weapon a few times, but I've never had to shoot anybody, thank God. But to act like police officers are going shooting people all the time, it actually doesn't happen. There's actually a great book for your listeners and viewers that I would highly recommend. It's a book by Professor Heather McDonald out of MIT called The War on Cops. And what she does is she actually takes 10 to 14 years to study that was actually done by the Department of Justice underneath the Obama administration. And what she shows is that there are uses of force with police officers, but what they don't tell you in the media in particular, they don't tell you, well, there's circumstances of it. Like, well, there's at one point where officers there's been times where I've just been talking to somebody and they've suddenly started trying to fight with me out of nowhere. We've had a good conversation and that happens. They talk about that. As far as shooting goes, on average, there's about 14 people, between 14 and 18 people killed a year by police officers by a firearm. Based on FBI, DOJ, and those statistics, what they've shown is that less than half of those have been ruled unjustified. And when those ones that are ruled unjustified in a court of law, those officers go to jail, they lose their job, and they get put in prison.
Right.
And that's something that doesn't ever get talked about. Another big thing that I don't really enjoy is that kind of a part A of what I just talked about is that people seem to think that we're out there just trying to arrest people on BS charges. Now, are there some cops that do that? Yes, unfortunately there are, and people like that need to be rooted out. And that's something that people need to talk about, and they never do. And the third, to kind of piggyback on that, is that people think that they hear about this thin blue line, which for your viewers and listeners will know is kind of the thin line between the chaos and the order in civilization, and that police are that line to protect people. The kind of the sheepdogs that are protecting the sheep from the wolves. And people seem to think that police officers are out there protecting bad cops. I've been a cop for nearly a decade, and for example, Derek Chauvin, there wasn't a single cop that I've talked to or I know that said, no, what that guy did was right. It doesn't happen. There isn't one. And if there is some police officer said that what that happened was okay, then they shouldn't be a police officer. So those big three things are probably big ones. Just media, the fact that cops are out there arresting for bull crap charges, and the third thing is that we protect bad cops. Nobody's out there trying to protect bad cops, and at least that I'm aware of, or anyone that I know of. And people seem to have this facade of, you see in Ohio there's dirty cops. I personally have never seen anything dirty. I've never seen a cop take money. I've never seen a cop plant drugs on them. I've never seen a cop make an excuse to arrest somebody. That's never happened. It just doesn't happen. And people seem to think that happens all the time. And it's quite frankly, it's just not the truth, at least in my experience.
Right. And if it did happen in front of you, you're one of the good ones. You make sure.
I would run at the flag. I'd be like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, if I saw a police officer say take money, I mean, luckily enough, I work at a department where we have body cameras, which is a huge thing, which I really enjoy. But if someone's trying to do something like that, I would be the first person to stay in, because you have to root out people like that are going to be doing wrong things. They're going to be doing criminal things, because once you know how it is, one bad apple, ruins the whole batch. So that's something that I've never had to do, thank God, because the men and women I work with are of high level integrity. So if I were to ever come to a situation, you bet your ass I would say something about that. You have to, because you're not only doing disservice to the citizens, but doing disservice to yourself as well by letting that slide. Right.
So I'm gonna go to a few comments here before we move on and get kind of caught up here. Everybody just wanted to say hi. Mary, she's in Facebook jail again.
If you're speaking her mind, yeah,
and that seems to happen. Chris wants to say that he would argue, this is going back to the training, that not everyone needs training on cartels and other such scenario-specific training that is way outside the scope of everyday life for a small Midwestern police department, aka stop wasting money training for fantasy scenarios and train for real life. Now, I will say this, to an extent, I agree that not. I've said this before. I don't know when the police department started kind of bringing in these experts on military type tactics and kind of training it to police officers. I think it kind of started with the FBI and filtered down. I don't necessarily agree with that. Yes, police officers need to be able to defend themselves. They need to be able to be prepared for certain scenarios. But I think the big thing that kind of jumped that off, and maybe you know more than I, but I think it was in the 70s and 80s when the gangs in LA, maybe even as far back as the 60s, they had automatic weapons that they had smuggled in. And there was outright war on the streets of Los Angeles. And the police departments there had to do a more direct military defense style situation. Unfortunately, now we see various armored vehicles in certain police departments. Michigan City, for example, has one. I don't think that's appropriate for a town like Michigan City, but I'm not in charge. These training things come from much higher than the officers on the streets. You guys can't go in there and be like, no, don't train me in that. You got to train me in this. So what would you say? Like, if someone wanted to actually change how police departments are trained and the focus, who should they speak to?
Actually, police officers. Because the problem is that a lot of these, both Republican and Democrat, I'm not picking a party, both Republican and Democrat party members, let's just say for the Indiana General Assembly, unless they're coming to run for election, they don't come and talk to us. Mm-hmm. So I find it very hard to believe that these people know what they're talking about when they're not coming and speaking to us. So, and to push back on that gentleman's comment, I understand when he's talking about like cartel stuff like that in the Midwest, but there are where we live here in the first district in particular is right next to Chicago. I've personally seen highway interdiction officers and local departments statewide find $100,000 in cash and several pounds in cocaine and marijuana and heroin. So to say that stuff doesn't happen around here is not only ignorant, it's flat out not true. Now does that happen all the time? No, but to say that it doesn't happen at all it is not true. I've personally seen it. I've assisted officers on it. I remember early in my career, we can get on the topic of marijuana, but I remember early in my career, I assisted with another officer who stopped a 16-year-old who had 10 pounds of marijuana on him, 16 years old. Cow. So the 16-year-old had to get it from somewhere. Yeah. So to say that trafficking and stuff like that isn't happening in North Indiana, that's not true. And as far as the militaristic side of police officers, as far as getting SWAT gear and stuff like that, I would say I understand why people don't like it, because it puts a feeling of uneasement to people living in local cities. Like, wow, why do these police officers have full on gear like this? It's a little unnerving, right? Because then you start thinking about like, wow, if the police want to take over, they're way more advanced than what civilians have, right? I mean, they have automatic weapons and flashbangs and grenades and stuff like that. Totally understand. I think that's valid. I think one thing that doesn't get talked about, though, is that police had to do that in response to not only cartels, but excuse me, the criminals getting that gear themselves. There's I think it was in the 80s, they had that bank robbery where those two gentlemen were in full gear and they had armor piercing rounds, and the police couldn't do anything with it. There wasn't a SWAT team. That wasn't a thing. So what people don't understand is that the police officers have gotten more militaristic in response to what criminals have used. So criminals are getting hold of automatic machine guns. They're getting a hold of deadly weapons. So the police have to respond to that. I mean, the police would be useless if they didn't. They have to match toe for toe with them. So I definitely understand what your viewers are saying, especially your viewpoint as well, as far as the police officers having, MRAPs and full duty gear. I totally understand that, but we also have to meet the threat of those who don't obey the law, those who do have those deadly weapons. So until the sides can come down on that, we have to respond effectively.
Okay. I understand. Mary says, I thank both of you for your service. Men and women in blue need more support, not defunding. You guys deal with a lot. And she also says she didn't know you have to have a bell on the bike. A lot of bicyclists don't follow the traffic.
Like I said, there's some silly traffic rules out there that people don't know about, and then they think they're getting pulled over for no reason, but they're legitimate.
Right, and that's the thing too that I've seen is it's hard to know that you break a law that you're not aware of, but as we're told all the time, ignorance is not an excuse, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's all there. You can look up any law you want on the Indiana.gov website. They list everything. So
let's see here. Okay, so yeah, we got a few. Matt said 95% of the encounters with police he's had have been positive, and he's fine with you guys having ARs. Just leave his alone.
Yeah, I mean that's so. Just to piggyback what Matt had said, I've told people this all the time. I've never had a problem with anybody who did exactly what I asked them to do. Hey, sir, ma'am, can I please have your license and registration? The reason why I stopped you was because of X, Y, and Z. You blew a stop sign. You didn't use a turn signal. Never had a problem with anybody who just did exactly what I asked them to. Mm-hmm. Never, not once. In my 8-year career, I've never had a formal complaint written on me. Not once, not a single time. Never been written up for that. Nothing like that. So the only people I do have an issue with are the people that start, MFing me right off the get-go, or why'd you pull me over, or they start giving me attitude. I tell you what, I'll say for most cops, 99% of the time, as long as you're respectful and cordial with them, they'll usually write you a warning. But if you start doing an attitude, you're gonna get tickets. And now what that cop's gonna do is start trying to find little things to nitpick you on. Now you went from getting a warning to get over $1,000 in tickets just because of your attitude. Right. What I tell people all the time, those who argue with me, go, look, this isn't the time to argue your case. The time to argue your case is in court. If you feel that I'm out of line, feel free to take me to court. I have to show up. I get a subpoena. I have to show up. It's not an option. And then we'll both argue your case there. If the court feels that what I did was wrong, they will rule in your favor. If they believe that what you did was wrong, they will rule in my favor. It's really that simple. And I just, people need to understand that. And then go to piggyback off Matt too as well. A comment about messing with his guns. I'm a firm believer in believing particularly Indiana red flag laws are illegal. I've said that from the get-go. You and I talked about that. We were both congressional candidates. And then also too, as a police officer, I don't take anyone's guns. I just don't understand that. I'm not in a position to say, no, you can't have your gun. And I think the fact that the Indiana General Assembly in particular, who is Republican, says that it's okay, that's a big issue for me. Mm-hmm. And it's very disappointing, but we can go on for days about that. So. Right.
I'm going to, just so everybody's aware, I'll get to the rest of your comments in a moment. I do want to make sure we get part 2 in here before we get caught up in too many comments. But so I know you're aware of it, but maybe some of the viewers are or not, but there's a fad. I call it a fad. It's becoming more and more prevalent. These so-called First Amendment audits, right? That's what they call them. That in some cases they're annoying and dangerous. In other cases, it's people simply exercising their rights. Sure. The problems can and do happen, but ultimately the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that people can film anything they can see from a public area. Have you personally received, like at your department or at the academy, have they focused on this at all? Because it's becoming more and more prevalent and more people are trying to get YouTube famous by, in many cases, I believe, intentionally trying to cause a reaction from officers. Have you guys been taught anything about this?
No, it's more of we kind of like a heads up. So we actually had a couple guys that came up from Florida and they were in town trying to kind of do some of the bait and switch stuff there. I have no issue with people recording me. I have a body camera on the entire time. So I tell them, that's fine. You can record me. I'm just going to record you. Mm-hmm. The problem with some of these First Amendment people, though, is that what they don't understand is that you can't come up right next to the officer while he's on a traffic stop. You can't get in the middle of him trying to arrest somebody. That's illegal. You can't do that. I have to be able to exercise my duty as a police officer. And if you interfere with that, you go to jail. So it's interference with an officer executing his duty. So I think it's a B misdemeanor in the state of Indiana, if I recall correctly. That's an actual crime. I tell people all the time, look, if you want to record, that's fine. I need you to go ahead and step on the sidewalk. And what people don't understand is, and a lot of it too, like you alluded to, people just want to try to go viral and try to get a lawsuit and stuff like that.
Right.
Is that people don't understand is that I'm dealing with somebody in the car and I have no idea at this point if they have a gun, if they have intention to kill me. You can look online. There's videos where officers walk up to a car and they get shot before they've even said anything. So not only do I have to deal with the person who's in the car, now I have to deal with somebody who's within 4 feet of that vehicle. So now I'm distracted now. So now it becomes an officer safety issue. So people are more entitled, like you had said, the Supreme Court, they're entitled to record whatever they want, but they need to do it from a safe distance. I'm not asking to go a football field length away. Just go on the sidewalk. I'm in the middle of something. After I'm done with them, I'll talk to whoever they are. I'll talk to them for 20 minutes. It doesn't matter to me. But they can't be in the middle of what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to arrest somebody, if I'm trying in the middle of a traffic stop and enforcing local and state traffic ordinances, they can't get in the middle of that. That's illegal. That's been established in Indiana law. You cannot do that. And people, for whatever reason, seem to think that's not the case, and that unfortunately they're wrong.
Well, that actually leads into my next question, which is, I can give my opinion all day, but I've never been an officer on the street. What, from that perspective, if somebody's thinking about going out and, filming their local police department or going to the post office or doing any of the other things that these First Amendment auditors, set out to do, which I will never tell anyone not to exercise your rights. I've talked about this before. I am a firm believer in absolutely exercise your rights. But what would you like people to know before they go out and grab a camera and start doing this?
Well, first I would say don't do it, because I don't know what you're seeking to gain from it, but it's your First Amendment right. If you want to go ahead and do it, that's fine. What I would recommend is just make sure you're not getting in the middle of the police officer's way. If they tell you need to get back so they can exercise you, you need to get back. I would recommend, if you're going to record anything, I'd say at the minimum 40 yards away from the scene, because the problem is that if I'm dealing with somebody, okay, and let's say this person and I get in a fight and he has a gun, well, God forbid, what happens if he starts shooting rounds going off? You could get killed because you want to record a police officer just because you want to do it. People don't understand that. Now, obviously, situations like that are extremely rare for people that are going out recording police officers. It's very rare. But again, it goes back to what I talked about before, is that not only do I have to worry about the person I'm engaging with, now I have to worry about you who's deciding just to record just because you want to. So I would recommend that they would stay at least 40 yards away. And if a police officer tells them, sir, ma'am, please back off, okay, then just move away. You can still record, but just move away from the scene, just get further back, because it's not only for the officer's safety, but it's for the safety of the person recording.
Okay. So if you could talk to other law enforcement that maybe are going to have one of these auditors show up in their city, what would you say to them?
Don't take the bait. Don't take the bait, because there's people out there that are looking to get police officers in trouble. There was an incident, I think, in East Chicago not too long ago. There was a gentleman recording officers doing it, and he made a threat saying that he was going to wring their neck. And people have to understand this too, just to piggyback off what we're talking about, is that if you make a threat towards an officer, that's a felony. Like if you say, I'm going to kick the crap out of you, that's a felony. That's felony intimidation against a law enforcement officer. So people need to understand, you can say what you want, but there comes a line when you start threatening violence, you go to jail for it. And that's a felony. That's not like you get out of jail, like you pay a bond. Like, no, you get held until you see a judge. So if I would tell other officers, and I try telling guys, and I need to remind them sometimes too, is that don't take the bait. They're allowed to record what they want to do. If you feel uncomfortable, ask for another unit to come by. Hey, look, I'm dealing with this guy right now in traffic stop. There's somebody here recording me. They're getting too close to this scene. Could somebody swing by and just stand by with them while I'm dealing with this person? Because there's nothing wrong with having more cops. If you have more people, the better. That way we can make sure the whole scene is safe. So those are probably the two biggest things that I would say.
Okay. So ultimately, because I'm going to say this, Chris especially, he's got some comments here, and he's done some First Amendment audits before, and he's actually has some current litigation due to some of them. So obviously he can speak from the other side of that, from the auditor's perspective. Do you personally think that officers need to be more up to date on for lack of a better term, people's rights and how that influences these audits. You know, like you're very familiar with the Supreme Court case that I referenced with the recording in public, but what about others that are maybe not so prevalent? There's a very slippery slope there when it comes to legal. You guys aren't attorneys. You do the very best that you can in the circumstances that you're in. And I've seen some of these auditors kind of use the law in a way it's not exactly intended. Maybe it follows the letter, but not the spirit. So sure. Like you said, if they're right up on you, maybe technically they can until you tell them not to, at which case it becomes interference. But maybe they're too close, and yeah, technically they can be at that time, but should they be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, and I think the fact is that for officers to know every single law in the book is impossible. But I think a lot of it, what it comes down to, is the reasonable expectation test, which is basically what we're taught in the academy as well for the criminal law, is that what would a reasonable person expect? A reasonable person would expect that coming right in between an officer and a person that he's engaging with is probably not a good idea, right? Like it's probably legal. It's probably not the right thing to do. It's probably not safe, and it's probably only going to make the situation worse. So I have no problem. These people, they want to come out and record people, by all means, go ahead. I have no issue with that whatsoever. They want to come talk to people in parking lot, officers in parking lot, stuff like that. They're allowed to do that. There's nothing against that. But there also has to be some kind of built-in common sense with that as well. So there's people that kind of they're executing the First Amendment, but they also are pushing it past that point too, when they're making things harder on themselves. So
right.
We have to treat this very lightly as far as how not only officers execute their authority, but how people who think they're invoking the First Amendment, how they execute that as well.
Right. And police officers are human. They make mistakes. I've seen videos where officers have made mistakes. I've seen videos where those officers have, been terminated because they went way too far. There are other circumstances. Yeah, and some of them they absolutely should be. There are other cases where the officer just simply made a mistake and wasn't quite clear, and a complaint was filed and all that. But there are times that I've personally witnessed with these videos where these people instigate. Not all, let me make that very clear. Not all of the First Amendment auditors instigate, but I've seen some that just really push that boundary, and you can tell they're desperately wanting an officer to, like you said, take the bait and do something that's ultimately going to end up in a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that happens too. And look, as officers, we need to do a better job of holding our bearing when these people are basically just trying to bait us into getting in arguments and to going viral. With that being said, and it doesn't necessarily make an excuse, but depending on where you're at and what officers do with those stress, like I could have just got done dealing with the fact of, I just got done seeing a dead kid, and now I've got this guy harassing me, talking all this crap, getting in my face. There comes a point where I have no problem holding police officers accountable, but no one ever really seems to hold these kind of people responsible, though. These people that are intentionally instigating it. So that's one thing that kind of frustrates me, is that hold police officers responsible. You absolutely should be. If an officer crosses the line, there should be discipline. There should be a complaint filed. But there also needs to be accountability for these people that intentionally speak out to bait officers and intentionally start things. Those people need to be held accountable as well. And I wish that more people like you would bring it up. More people like you bring it up, but there's people in general, like the media doesn't bring that up at all. And no one seems to talk about that. Like, well, this cop, beat the crap out of me and I was recording. Like, okay, well, he didn't just beat the crap out of you. You had to have said something. You had to have instigated it. Does that mean that sometimes that cops just snap for no reason and do that? Yeah, it does happen. But a majority of the time, what you see in these First Amendment situations is that these auditors is that they will intentionally instigate.
Yeah, I've seen it.
They're there to do that because they're I don't know what the reasons. They're bored or they're looking to get money, but they literally do it to seek out conflict, which I mean, I don't know, man. I feel like people would have better things to do, but I guess not.
Well, to play devil's advocate for a moment, I've seen many videos. I've watched dozens of hours because I was interested in it. I was like, okay. And actually, the thing that set it off was the very guy that you talked about in East Chicago. He was actually on my show before, and then he goes out, and I learned about the case. Apparently, he started flagging down an officer that was responding to something else or just coming from something else, and it ended up going very wrong. The man got injured. I feel bad for him, but ultimately I started jumping into these, and I'm like, okay, what is this? Like, what is this phenomenon? What are people doing? And I've seen a lot of videos where nothing happens, where it's a very cordial exchange. It's, this person does this. And I've seen other videos where officers are not aware of the law. They don't know enough. And I've seen some where the auditor has just really instigated a situation that ends up with them arrested and with fines. And even if ultimately, because there were cases, a few, I'm not gonna say there were a lot, but there were a few where a person comes upon a situation, they're doing their audit thing, and they instigate and eventually go too far. The officer has to do what they have to do to get control of the situation. One in particular I saw was during a traffic stop where, like you said, the officer doesn't know what's going on with the person in the car. They don't know who this person is. And this officer could have come from a very bad call. They could have had all kinds of things going on. This individual ends up getting arrested. Whether they win the case or not, they're still spending time in jail until they can bond out or whatever. And for what? So that they could be YouTube famous?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, and to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, not saying there's officers that do the wrong thing, and that's the thing though, that all of that can be avoided if you're not interfering with the police doing their job. If they're coming out and doing this First Amendment audit, you can't go to jail if you're not out there recording and getting in the police officer's way. Now, like you alluded to earlier, there's guys that are perfectly far enough away, they're not interfering whatsoever, and then the cop instigates it. And look, they get arrested. That's wrong. It shouldn't happen. But that's the style you're day in court.
Right.
You can also avoid this stuff if you just don't, aren't just coming up on a police officer right in the middle of a traffic stop. It's 100% avoidable. And that, unfortunately, is something that's not talked about. I have no problem with holding cops accountable because they should be. We are entrusted with enforcing the law. It's this huge responsibility that there's police officers don't seem to really understand what kind of privilege that we have in our job. But there also needs to be accountability on those who are instigating and causing these issues too. So officers take the blame, but people also causing the issues need to take the blame as well. Right.
And ultimately, it's one of those things that there's going to be disagreement, from this side and that side. I suspect that from an officer's perspective, it's like for example, a certain individual that I know of, I'm not going to mention any names, but a certain individual that I know of went traipsing through the grounds of Indiana State Prison with a camera, right? Okay, fine, except if you leave the street, those officers in those towers, because there are armed men in those towers with rifles and shotguns, they have to consider that a threat. They have to consider that as some type of escape initiation. Who knows? Because people throw things over the fence. They do all kinds of things at the prison. The part that I told them is you have to keep that in mind. You have to remember, and this, because my experience is at Indiana State Prison. I was a tower officer for a while. I know what they're doing in the tower. I know what they're aware of, what they should be aware of. So if you're going to go and do that, you need to be aware that you may get shot. Is it right that you get shot? Absolutely not. No, you shouldn't get shot. But if you do, it's too late. You're already dead. It's who's to blame? the officer in the tower, maybe, but what actions led to that?
Yeah, it's kind of what we're talking about. Like people need to understand that police officers are a reaction type of force. We're not seeking, like, we're always reacting. We're reacting, not acting. So we're reacting to somebody blowing a stop sign. We're reacting to somebody who's beating their wife. We're reacting to somebody who robs somebody. We're reacting to somebody who commits traffic violations. We're reactive. We're not proactive. Now there's, so you can make the argument that, stopping cars is being proactive, but we're reacting to other people's actions. Because somebody else did something, we are reacting to that action in itself. And I feel like that's a big misconception, or a big thing that people just don't understand or don't think about.
Right. So let's see. Well, Chris left. He was upset that that you didn't agree with him, which is fine. Everybody has their opinions. Matt just wanted to say that if you are going to film, social distance, right?
Yes, yeah, and you got to make sure that it's going to be 7 feet now, because I'm sure the Delta variant is going to be even more deadly than the 6 feet.
Right.
I mean, geez, yeah.
Oh, Liz actually has a couple of questions for you. First, what made you want to be a police officer? I think
it was the closest way I could to becoming Batman. No, I'm just kidding. No, but what
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, what drew me to law enforcement in particular. So I got out of the Marine Corps, and I still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I was an amphibious assault vehicle crewman for years at home. It's basically driving and maintaining an amphibious tank. Well, there's not really high demand for that in the civilian world. So right out the get-go, I had a friend who worked at a local department who said, "Hey, look, I can get you hired as a dispatcher, and just so you can get on your feet, get a job going, and you can go to school, you can figure out what you need to do." Well, as a start of that's what kind of snowballed into doing it. So I started being a 911 dispatcher, so taking phone calls for emergency operations, dispatching officers to calls, and it really started to kind of snowball into that. And then one thing it also kind of does, I don't want to say it's paramilitary because it's not, but what I like doing is being part of a team, having the camaraderie of coming together and working towards a goal. So police work naturally kind of filled that void for me that I was missing with the military, because in the military, in the Marines, you're working together, you're working towards a common goal, you're striving for success, and you're doing that together. In police work, you have an opportunity to do that. You have an opportunity to not only be by yourself and kind of do your own thing, but when there's bad guys on the streets, you can work together to solve that problem. And that's what really brought my interest to it.
Okay. That's awesome, man. I'm going to tell you, I really wish more people that if they don't go out and at least perform service, like community service, whether it's, via police officer or joining the military, could at least understand the people that do and defend them and support them. But Liz wants to know, can you see your fellow police officers acting like they do in Australia and other countries right now?
Not a chance. Not a chance. No, and this is something too, because you mean to tell me you're going to have police officers in the East Appalachia, West Virginia, going to take people's guns? You think that's going to happen? There's no way, because I know I will. I don't like enforcing Indiana's gun laws themselves. I think they're a violation of the Constitution, and I think they're illegal. So if you think that you're going to have police officers going door to door taking guns, you're out of your damn mind. I mean, I've already ordered a placemat for my front door that says "Come back with a warrant." So I mean, and I'm a police officer, so that's kind of my deal on that.
Right.
I don't foresee that ever happening. And if there is any police officer, when you take the oath to become one, you say they execute the duties of the Constitution, and you'll be a defender against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So if you have somebody, if you're chief of police, your sheriff saying, "Hey, you need to go door to door confiscate guns," you should rightfully tell them to pound sand, because that's not what we're there to do. And any police officer that does do that should lose their job immediately.
So I have one last question for you, and this is just me personally. It's something that I've been thinking about, and so I'm learning actually that there's a big difference, at least as far as the Constitution and law goes, between county sheriff and the various local municipality police departments, even state police. The only thing constitutionally mandated is the county sheriff, which I was like, okay, so what are all these other police departments about and for, and started learning more about that. But what would you think if, just again, this is a purely opinion-based question, but
Sure.
what if we took all the money that's currently going to the various state police agencies, local police, FBI, all these other agencies, and simply put it into the county sheriff, and everyone that was a police officer had to be a deputy sheriff?
So you basically make it like a metropolitan police force, essentially, is what you're saying, right? So
Right,
basically, Indianapolis, like how they cover a large portion of central Indiana, something like that. Well, I mean, I kind of made that argument back, what was it, 5 years ago, when the Indiana Assembly, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make to have Lake County take over local municipality dispatches.
Okay.
So I said, well, if you're going to have people in Lake County and Crown Point take phone calls for people in Hammond who've never lived in Hammond, don't know anything in Hammond's at, why don't you just make us a metropolitan police force? Just if Indiana's gonna do that, just break up the state districts. Say the first district is everyone in Lake Porter, maybe Newton, Jasper County, and then what you do is you make all those together, and then what you do is that's the first district, and then everything east of Porter County, it could be the third district, and out to Mishawaka, South Bend. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that's something that that I think if the states, I don't say they're slow walking to, but if they're going to make us blend our dispatchers together to where you have one person dispatching for, let's say, Munster, Griffith, and Dyer, and then you have one person doing just Munster and Whiting, or Hammond and Whiting, or stuff like that, you kind of might as well just make us a metropolitan police department, because we're all operating on different channels and we're covering the same area. The problem is that you're going to get into is that some areas will be covered more than some other areas. So then how does that work? So let's say, for example, Hammond taxpayers will say that Munster's getting patrolled more heavily than Hammond is, or Griffith's getting more heavily patrolled than Griffith is. So Griffith and Highland. So that's kind of the issue we'd run into. But I know, like, that's, for example, to the Indianapolis Metropolitan. They basically encompassed not only Indianapolis, but some surrounding counties, and they took over from municipalities, and they actually were running the show.
Yeah, I was just curious because, like, for example, let's say here, I'm not as familiar with Lake County as LaPorte County, but LaPorte County, we have three main departments, right? We have the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department, which their base, their headquarters, the jail is in LaPorte. And then we have the LaPorte City Police Department, which really after like 6 p.m., LaPorte County takes over anyway. And then you have the Michigan City Police Department. Now, granted, there's Westville and some outlying towns, but all of these places rely on the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department. And I know it might be a little more complex in an area like Lake County, where you have a lot of urban areas. But for example, if you were to take the Michigan City Police Department, the LaPorte Police Department, Westville, and all the funds that these municipalities are pouring into these departments and simply go directly to the county sheriff, and then have the county sheriff have divisions, for lack of a better term, like in Westville or in LaPorte.
Yeah, areas of operation.
Do you think that would work, or do you think that is something maybe that the reason we have these municipal police departments is because we tried that and it didn't work?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would rely on your expertise. Unfortunately, I haven't had to spend too much time out in LaPorte County. I have friends out there, but I think every area is different. So like you said, for example, Lake County, we're way more heavily densely populated than, say, LaPorte County is. We just are. I mean, LaPorte County, you get east of Valpo, and it's really starting to get, it's basically farmland, So I think that's something that people in that area would particularly have to look into. As far as effectiveness, you would just have to, that would something I feel that would take years to kind of encompass, because then you have to think, okay, what officers cover what area? By encompassing all the departments into one, do you have more coverage or do you have less? In theory, you should have more coverage because now you have more officers working.
Right.
call-offs, vacations, sick time. It's one of those things too. And again, it goes back to what I said before. You're going to have Michigan City people that are going to be ticked off because they're not seeing enough sheriff people, but they know there's plenty out there in LaPorte.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting idea, Dion. I haven't really put too much thought into that, but now that's something I'm going to actually bounce out of guys off work. I'm actually kind of curious now.
Okay, yeah, let me know, because I'm actually curious as to, like, I can consider it and think about it all day, but you guys would have a much, much better idea as to how that would actually work. What if we changed nothing, had all the departments, but put the sheriff in charge rather than a local police commissioner or something like that? What if we, like, for example, if we took Michigan City Police Department, kept it intact, but they answer to the sheriff rather than a Michigan City Police Chief, an unelected individual that's politically, placed?
That's an interesting theory. I think the big problem you would have is how would you manage? So, like, for example, if you kept the local departments, well, now the sheriff has to manage 12 departments. Well, I mean, is that practical? Is that something he can do? Right. That'd be really hard. Like, let's say even if you had a sheriff and like your vice sheriff or whatever you happen to call it, two guys trying to control 12 agencies. You're talking about 12 different budgets, 12 different squad cars, 12 different departments, personnel. Yeah. You're talking thousands of officers. That'd be really hard to implement. And I think the reason why we do have local municipalities is because I'm assuming back in the day, the sheriff's department couldn't keep up with the ever expanding population density. I mean, where I work, and in 2 agencies that I've worked for, I don't think I've ever seen a Lake County sheriff squad car unless they were doing some kind of traffic blitz. Like, I haven't been working on a Tuesday afternoon and seen a Lake County sheriff in my city. I just haven't seen it. They just doesn't happen. So I think that's probably the big reason why municipalities, started out way back in the day, because sheriff's departments just couldn't encompass that much. Right.
I was just curious because it was something that I was thinking about, and it's like, obviously, you're for those people who are not aware, voting for sheriff is probably one of the most important votes you have.
Sure.
Sheriff is probably one of the most powerful people in your county, and they have the most direct effect on what happens with law enforcement in their little sphere. They can't do much about county, but they can investigate, city. They control county. They can't do much as far as changing policy with city, but they can and do in many cases investigate malfeasance and bad officers in city jurisdictions and stuff like that. Sheriffs is very, very important election. Do not leave it to chance. Investigate, learn about all these people that are running, but especially your county sheriff.
And interesting, real quick, just to piggyback off that, I know we're wrapping up, but one interesting thing that I learned in the academy, actually, you're talking about the sheriff, actually triggered my memory. Did you know that your county coroner is the only person that can arrest your local sheriff?
I'm glad you brought that up. I actually learned that relatively recently.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I'm like, wow, and they basically put it like, well, if somebody has to be able to arrest a sheriff.
Yeah.
So if it's not the feds, someone local has to be able to do it. So the coroner actually has arrest powers, or the sheriff, which I think is pretty wild.
And it's wild because the coroner can't arrest anybody else. Can they? They don't have general arrest powers.
No, they can only arrest a sheriff. It's like it's like the U.S. Marshals. They're the only federal agency that can arrest the president. So like U.S. Marshals, they can physically place the president in handcuffs. They're the only agency that can do that. Yes, Marshals are the only people that can do that. So it's similar with the county. At the county level, the coroners, they can only arrest one person, and the only person they can arrest is the sheriff.
I'll be darned. I see that. Yeah, I learned about the coroner recently because I was following the local coroner's race when I was running, and she mentioned that, which she won, by the way. Great coroner, Lynn. But that's a good question. Matt asked a good question. Can you do a citizen's arrest on a tyrannical sheriff?
So the tyrannical sheriff, you'd have to really justify what you would define as tyrannical, like
right.
You know what I mean? Like so citizens arrest in general, the way that works, and my understanding and the way I was taught was basically, let's say you see somebody steal a lady's purse, right? You can run after them and tackle them, and then hold them in an area until you can call 911. Now, here's the thing. You can't say throw them in a room and lock them in there. That's what's called criminal confinement. So it's kind of a weird area to where they can't be locked in a particular room or a secured area. They have to be, let's say, technically like outside, basically.
Yeah.
You could hold them down until police show up, but you can't say throw them in an office building or throw them in a room and lock them away. That's actually called criminal confinement.
Which is kind of wild if you think about it. You can hold them down in the middle of the street, but you can't place them in this room for safekeeping.
Yeah. We have that with people in drugstores or cigarette shops. Somebody will come in and they'll be intoxicated and they'll destroy the property, and they have the security buttons to basically make sure the door's locked in case someone tries to rob a store. It's like, you can't really do that. You're confining them to a space. It's actually illegal. It's just one of those things that, again, that's never really pushed. But it's kind of a weird thing.
I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because a little personal story. When I lived in LaPorte, there was a certain little gas station where the kids would go and buy candy or whatever. And there was a certain circumstance where I went in there, and they did that to my kids because my son sits on the floor to look at stuff. And the guy thought that was suspicious and maybe he had stolen something. So he locked them in. And I'm like, after they were let go and came home, I went up there and I'm like, listen, man, I'm not gonna call the police or anything, because ultimately there was no harm done. But that's criminal confinement. You can't just lock people in a store because you think they may have maybe done something you didn't like. These are legal. Again, I'm just a concerned parent. I'm just trying to let you know before you do get yourself in trouble, because there are people who will take that very personally and respond with way worse than calling the police, man.
For sure. Yeah. And that's, we try to tell the shopkeepers, you can't lock people in your store. Look, even if they're committing a crime, and so they would probably argue that's part of a citizen's arrest, but people still have to be able to freely come and go, regardless if they're committing a crime. That's why you call the police, and plus too, it's more bad can happen than good out of the situation, unfortunately, which is true.
Right. And I really feel bad for the people that have the shops that are constantly getting robbed. I mean, look at the West Coast right now, man. These people just going in and cleaning off the shelves, and officers can't even arrest them. I personally have no idea how someone who signed up to be a law enforcement officer can look at what's going on the West Coast, especially California and Portland, where they basically decriminalized everything, and not and not shake their heads and go, what is wrong with people?
But that goes back to what we started out at the beginning, right, Dion? That's why your local elections matter, because local officials are saying that. Local officials are saying, hey, we're not going to anything. If you steal anything under $900, it's not a crime. Local officials are doing that. Your local prosecutor is saying that we're not prosecuting people like that. That's why, like what you and I talked about, that's why your local elections matter the most, because you're electing people who say, hey, I'm not going to charge anybody who steals $899 worth of stuff. That's a big problem. That's a huge problem. I mean, look at Minnesota, where George Floyd was killed. A lot of shops around there closing down because there's so much crime rampant through there right now. People stealing, robbing, and no one's coming to do anything about it. The police officers aren't going to do about it because they cut their budget. Now they're trying to reimplement another $20 million into it. Right. But the cake's already been baked. So that's why your local elections matter, man. And people need to understand that, because that directly affects what happens in your community.
Yeah, and that sums it up very, very well. And I think that's a great place to kind of end it. Is your local elections matter? They influence so much that people aren't aware of, from your local codes to can your trash cans be on the side of your house, all the way up to letting criminals literally get away with robbing you blind. It's a big spectrum there, but it all comes down to your local elections.
Absolutely.
Mary wants to know. First she says, so I can use reasonable force to subdue someone until the police arrive. She's talking about on citizen's arrest, right?
Sure.
But if she has to body slam someone to subdue them, will I catch a battery charge for it? MAGA Matt said, well, it depends.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, it depends. Like, what exactly is the situation for? Like, are you doing it just to do it, or like or because let's say you think someone's committing a crime and you hold them, confine them, or you batter them in order to get them to stop them from doing what they're doing, and it turns out you're wrong. Yeah, you can be held liable. So that's why I always tell people, call the police, because we can deal with the liability. Your average Joe, average Jane can't, because we can take care of the problem. Your average citizen either can't, or they're setting themselves up for a big criminal proceeding, and we don't want that to happen.
Right. Well, Matt wants to know, both of you guys have my vote. Unless it's the same ticket, then it's me, which I appreciate, Matt. But our days of running against each other, I think, are over. That's how I met him. But I probably will be. Well, not probably. There's some stuff coming. I can't make an official announcement yet because I don't have everything I need. But I'll be running for state rep again, unless something bad happens. But I hope Spencer decides to continue in the political field, but it's up to him. But he's got my support if he does choose to. So I doubt we'll be against each other. We'll be on the same side.
No, we're gonna be on the same side from here on out, buddy.
But thank you very much for joining us, man. I appreciate it. I think everyone else appreciates it too. And hey, we all here, at least everybody that's left. Chris left, so everybody else supports you.
I appreciate that, Dan. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna kick you out of the stream here, but not out of the lobby, and I'll talk to you after I end the stream.
Sounds great.
All right, man. All right, so that was Spencer Lemmons, who joined us. He is a current police officer and a Marine. They say there's no such thing as a retired Marine, or no such thing as a former Marine, right? We learned a lot. I did. I learned a very great deal, and it is good for me that we have patriots, because he is, make no mistake, this man is a patriot, in our various departments across Northwest Indiana. And I just want to say thank everybody for joining us tonight. And if you have any questions, I'm sure he'd be available. I'm always available because I have no life. I'm kidding. God bless you. God bless Indiana, and God bless the United States of America.